So it looks like I'm going to be forced into a nursing home. Apparently I'm getting too old to live this way. I mean, I don't even understand that. I mean, I don't even understand why I can't just go and get a regular job. I guess when you get gray hair, that's time for you to wrap it up in this society. I tell you, it's just not a lot of work here, at least in my mind, but I guess I'm wrong about that. During the winter, I got to come out here about 3 times a week, and I grab 3 or 4 armloads of firewood. Now, I guess the biggest problem is when we started splitting the firewood, we didn't know what size wood stove we were going to get. We split it to what we thought. We used to have that old Franklin down there by the camper, and so we split it all towards the Franklin. But when we got it, the wood stove in the tiny house, there was 2 things. One, it just didn't need to be that big going into the wood stove, and 2, it just gets so hot in there. So if you have too much firewood, it's just burning out. So I had to get this firewood, and then I take the little hatchet and a hammer, and I split it a little bit smaller than what it is already. Now, after we got the wood stove, we realized we didn't even need the length that we were getting here. So later, when we started getting this stuff, we cut it even smaller, about half the size of what that size stuff is. But even that should probably be split again. So I guess that's the biggest problem, is I should have split it more, but it's not even really a problem. Like I said, I come out maybe 3 times a week at most, grab a few handfuls, armloads, split it, take it in the house, and then I let it dry. Now there's 2 types of dry. There's the dry where it's green and you got to let it sit for 2 years to get all that green out of it. Or there's the dry that it got rained on and you need to let it go in by the wood stove for a few hours so that rain evaporates off of it. And so that's all I do, is I take it in for a couple days, let it dry out. Another thing that I have to do regularly is I fill the water tank. I don't even understand why this is such a big deal. The water tank is not a big deal. I start the generator, I drag the hose over here, I lift the lid on the tank, I remove 2 pieces of insulation, open the cap to the tank, and I fill it with a water hose. I set a timer, then I come back out and make sure it's full, then I shut the generator off. So to me, that's not a big deal, and I do that about every 3 days. I guess towards the middle of winter, I started waiting 5 or 6 days just because I didn't want to come out in the cold, but it's really just because I was being lazy. But now her son is here, I'm making sure that I come out every 3 days. And what I do is I wait until the tank gets about quarter empty, so 3/4 full, and I fill it back up. That way, if we have a problem with the water pump, the well pump, or the generators, it's no big deal. Now, we now have 3 generators, and as you know, one of them is on the kaput, and I bought a carburetor, which I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. Then we have this brand new one. It's a lot smaller. I say a lot smaller. Physical size, it's a lot smaller than the last 2 generators we got. And it was $299. But as far as wattage, it's 1,500 watts, whereas the other is 2,000 watts. I like this generator a lot, but it's not as good as the Champion generators, by far. The Champion generator has a high-low speed that you could physically manipulate. You turn it on high, then you can lower it. So if you're getting ready to start a really high-producing pump, like the well, I can turn it on high, start the pump, and then turn it back down on low. But this doesn't have a high-low. So when you're starting a pump, it won't turn it on. It could be that the pump is requiring more wattage than what even the Champion is supposed to be able to produce. And it might be that the Champion is just capable of producing that much electric, whereas this one cannot. It can't even power up the little refrigerator we got. But that's okay. I'm not upset about that at all. It's going to serve its purpose, the reason I bought it, very well, which is to run the battery charger to charge batteries. Now, the one thing I didn't like about it was the instructions said it uses 1 gallon of gas every 8 hours, whereas the Champion uses 1 gallon of gas every 11 hours. I didn't like that, and I really struggled with this mindset. But yesterday, after I ran it for 4 hours, now it doesn't even hold a gallon of gas, it holds 0.75, so it runs 6 hours, it says, I think. I had to do the math. Don't quote me on the math, don't quote me on the numbers, but I know it was 8 hours per gallon of gas. So it says it will run 6 hours on a tank of gas. I came out yesterday after 4 hours and I topped it off, and it didn't take much gas at all. It certainly didn't seem like I had to fill the tank that much. So I don't think the instructions were right. I think it's using less gas than it says it's supposed to, which is great, because that was the one thing I really didn't like about this. When it has to power the battery charger, it does increase in speed. So when the battery charger, let's say, is doing 10 amps, because as you charge the batteries, the amperage drops on the battery charger. So I started out at 25, and this thing's running pretty fast because it's got to use more power. But then it drops down. So it is a little bit louder than the Champion. I would not recommend using this. It's called Power Smart. It was $299 for 1,500 watts. I wouldn't use it for camping. It would be too loud for the neighbors camping. But out here in off-grid, I walked over to the property line. I could barely hear it. The biggest thing I would worry about is Carolyn's son having to listen to it when he's asleep. But I don't think he's minded. I ran it 2 mornings in a row now, and he hasn't even mentioned it. So I'll wait until he mentions it before I tell you if it's too much. But it seems to be working pretty good. And then, of course, we have the dual fuel generator. And the dual fuel I like a lot. It runs off gas and propane. It's 2,500 watts. So that one's 15. The dual fuel is 2,500. Now, when you're running it on propane, I think that drops down to 1,800 running or starting watts. It's starting watts and running watts and all that stuff. So it's not quite as much as it's advertised. But running on gasoline, of course, there's more power to it. Now, I run this on propane because it sits up here waiting to be ran. If you leave gasoline in the generator too long, I think they say 30 days or 2 weeks. I forget what it says in the instruction, but you're not supposed to leave gasoline in it very long, or it starts to eat up the seals in the carburetor, which I've had happen. I had a generator, Champion, left it in the back of the truck for 30 days with gasoline in it, and it did damage the carburetor. So I like to run this on propane. The downside to running this on propane, you can hear it, is it runs faster on RPMs. I'm not saying it uses more fuel. It actually uses about the same amount of money running on propane as it does on gasoline. Now, I get propane for $12 a can, 20 pounds. So I've done all the costs, and in a 30-hour runtime, which is what it's all calculated out in the instructions, it's cheaper to run it on propane, even though it runs on a higher RPM. Well, if you're charging a battery, you don't want it to run on a higher RPM because you're just going to wear out the engine. It's got to do more in the same amount of time. If you're running the battery charger for 4 hours, you're going to want to run it on gas, just so you're not wearing out your generator. But sitting up here, it makes a lot of sense because when I do run it, I've got to run it at a pretty high RPM anyways, because the well pump takes a lot of RPMs. So this just works out really well for the well pump. Now, the downside to this is it is hard to start when it's cold. Yeah, you got to put it on choke, and you got to pull it 5 times on propane, and then you got to take it over to propane switch, and then you pull it. When it's really cold, you can't even pull the rope. When it was -6 degrees, this thing would not pull. I had to take it in and warm it up. Now, I do have that old generator that we've had, 4 or 5 years now, and it started no problem, but the problem was it was so old it wouldn't run the well pump anymore. So I had to take this in and just warm it up. I ran it on gasoline that day just to make it easier for myself. Besides those little flaws, I really do like that generator. Now, the old generator, been around for 5 years, and I did the calculations yesterday on yesterday's video. I'll put it up next box at the end of this video to that video so you can watch it. I think it's right around 8,000 hours that we've ran this. Now, if you think about it, a motor like this should only last about 900 hours. So about 10 times the amount is what it's done. It's been a fantastic generator, but it stopped running the other day. So I told you I was going to have to replace carburetor. That was my guess. I have no idea if that was what was going to solve a problem or anything. Yesterday I got the carburetor, told you that in yesterday's video. I got the carburetor. After I made the video, I went ahead and changed out the carburetor, even though I said it was too cold. It warmed up a little bit. It was a little windy. I just put my coat on and it wasn't too bad. Here's the old carburetor. Now, it's just like any other carburetor. The big thing about this carburetor is this little thing right here. Now, when I ordered a new carburetor, it named this in the parts manual as a carburetor motor. But I was corrected in the comment section. They said, no, this is called a step motor. So I Googled it. If it is not assembled to this thing, to the carburetor, it is called a step motor. But apparently, when a company attaches it to one of their products, they name it something else. Anyway, I think that went out. So I replaced that, and it's all shiny and new. This is an aftermarket one, and it fits really nice in there. The one thing that didn't do well, gas line right here, was bigger on the new carburetor. But it didn't matter. The gas line slid on it. It was a little tight, but it slid on. The gaskets they gave me were kind of generic. So I just used the old gaskets. If it doesn't work, that's fine. I'll take it back off, put the new gaskets on. But the reason I use the old gaskets is because the new gaskets, I would have to trim around a little to get it to fit well. And I figured, well, let's use the old ones. There weren't any issues with them. They weren't broke. So now we have the big reveal. I'm going to start it up, or try to start it up. But remember, it wouldn't start. It was dead. So I'm going to try to start it up on camera here. See if it starts. And if it starts, then I'm going to try to run the well pump off of it again. It has not been able to run the well pump in about a year. And even before that, it really struggled. So let's cross our fingers, see if it starts. Well, that's great. First pull, started right up. Let it warm up for a second. Now, I was telling you that that other one does not have a high-low switch. This one does, so I'm going to turn it on high. So surely you can hear that it's turned up on high. All right, let's see if it'll start the well. Ha-ha! It is now running the well. Pretty soon you'll see water spit out of that. Water's got to come up 100 feet out of the ground. I let that drain down. It'll come up. There it is, right there. We have water. Okay, now the final test. This may not work, and I'm not too worried about it if it doesn't. Is I'm going to turn it back down because when you're running it, you want to save gasoline. It works. That is awesome. So I'm going to order some new spark plugs. I try to change out the spark plugs on this about once a year, simply because it does use a lot of oil. It burns oil, and so all that crud gets on that spark plug. You can clean them, and the maintenance book says to clean them, but I just like replacing them. They're not that expensive, like $4 a year, big deal. So now I've talked about this a lot with Carolyn, and what are we going to do with this generator? This has become like an old friend to me. I really have grown attached to it. It's done a great job. It's been a real workhorse around here. I know it's an inanimate object, and who really cares? But I think we're going to retire it. You know, I said at the beginning of the video, time for a nursing home. This is paid for itself. It's done a fantastic job. So we're just going to retire it and set it aside. I'm going to drain the gas out of it. If we need it for anything, then I'll use it. If this generator, now that we know that it works on the well pump, if this generator back here doesn't start up for some reason, like when it's cold, I can bring this one out, or that other generator. It's pretty generic, so I don't even know how long that one will last. We can use this one. I would imagine Carolyn's son's going to get pretty hot this summer, so if he needs an air conditioner, maybe we'll bring this one out of retirement for a short period and give him one of the generators to run. I don't know if I want to run this one really hard, so an air conditioner would pull a lot. Hopefully that little one could actually run it. I'm not going to run the propane one because, like I said, it uses more RPMs than necessary. But we'll figure something out. It's not a huge deal. But I do think I'm going to give this guy a rest and just use him as a backup for emergency services only, like a generator's supposed to be, not for a full-time, everyday run for 4 years. It's been fantastic. And so if you click that up next box, take that video I made yesterday talking about the new generator and the carburetor on this. So I hope I can inspire you to use your equipment until it needs retiring so you can live your dreams. Thanks for watching.